Okay, so just to check go through the exercise about manipulating strings. Um, the first function that we look at is regarding a form, basic form with four fields and a submit button, name, address, age, and submit. And then if you this is just copy pasted from the lesson, this code here. So I tried to comment the code to explain roughly what's happening, but basically we wrap everything in the regular jQuery function. Then we select the form with the class form, and instead of using a click event like we've seen before, we hook into the submit event, which happens when you click on the submit button. So when I click on the submit button, everything in here is going to happen in order. So if you read my comments, you should understand a bit what's happening. But basically, first of all, we initialize a variable which contains an empty string, which is going to contain everything we want to add, the line of text we want to add to the div afterwards. We also initialize a variable where we check if the form has any errors, because if the form does have errors, we don't want to submit it anyway. We want to be able to know that there's an error and therefore stop the form submission. Then we look at all the inputs inside the form. So here we use this little trick in jQuery which we've seen, which is where you select this, and if you're inside event handler like submit or click or whatever, then this refers back to the class or the element that you selected in the first section that you're attaching the event handler to. So in this case, this is the form that we are in. We then search within the form to find all the inputs. So we select all the inputs, and we want to exclude the input that is with the type submit. So this is just a regular CSS selector, yeah, input with the square brackets, type equals submit, which allows us to select using this attribute here to say we don't want this one. So we find all the inputs, we then exclude the one that has this type equals submit, and then for each of them we do the following thing. This is again a function in jQuery, each, and you pass a single parameter, which is an anonymous function here. Within the function, we look at so now this applies not to the form, but now because we've wrapped it in another function inside this now is the inputs that are not type equals submit. Okay, so we check to make sure it's not empty. Is the field empty? So we take this, which is the field, the input, and then we run this little function, again a jQuery helper called .val, which allows you to take the value, which is the text that I've written into the form here, and we check that it's not empty string. Okay, if it is an empty string, then we pop up this little alert to say warning, the field is empty, and this is where we're talking about string manipulation, because we concatenate the field name into the alert. So we have the text, just the field, and then this plus indicates that we're attaching another bit of text to that first bit of text, and the second bit of text is going to be, again, this refers back to the input, yeah? So the attribute name of the input, and if you look at the attribute name, you should see that each input has an attribute name, and this one is name, this one is address, this one is age, so it should say this, the field age is empty. It'll fire that alert, and then we set our variable that we defined up here, that we declared, as true. We say, okay, yes, the form does have errors, because later in the script we're going to check that variable. Does the form have any errors? If it doesn't have any errors, then we do the correct thing, but if it does, we don't do anything. So this is that first if. The condition was, is the field empty? So if the field isn't empty, then we do our regular processing. So this is again talking about string manipulation. So we're doing the same thing here, which is that we take the existing string to add, we add a space to it. Yeah, so plus just means attach this bit of text to the end of the existing bit of text. We then add a space, and then we do another plus, and we add the value of the current field. So the current field, this is still referring back to the input that we're in. And remember that we're doing this function for each input. So we're doing it first for the name, then we're doing it for the address, then we're doing it for the age. Why do we do this thing at the beginning here, where I've done string equals and then the string plus this and so on? That's because I want to add the want to add the new value, so add the new text. So for example, the first field is name, so I want the first name, and then I want a space, and then I want the address. So to do that, I take the first field, I take everything that already exists, all the previous fields go into this variable. I add the new value onto the end of it, and then I store that whole thing back into the variable. So next time I'll be adding onto the whole thing with that extra field, and then I'll add another field on the end, and so on. Finally, once I've added, so for each, I've gone through each of the inputs, and I've made a string, a variable, which now contains for each of them the name, the value, and a space. And then I check, does the form have errors? This variable is just a plain variable that I set myself, so it only gets set in this case here. If the form has errors, I set it to true, otherwise it's false, so because I set up here as false. So if it's still false, there has not been an error. So I then select the list, and I use this jQuery function, append, which allows you to add something inside an existing an element, and you add it to the content. You're not replacing the content, you're adding new content to the content. So I add the string, which is the name, address, and age now, and then a BR to create a line return. And then the last thing I do is I return false through the function, through the event handler, and that's a JavaScript trick which stops means that the actual submit, normally when you press the submit button, by default HTML refreshes the page and sends the data as a post. We don't want to do that because we're handling everything with JavaScript, so we want to cancel that sort of default action. And in JavaScript, to cancel any kind of default HTML action, you can just have the function at the end return false, and then none of the sequential things that would normally happen afterwards happen. So that's what that line does. If you have a look at the result, hopefully if I put one of these fields empty, I've got an alert which tells me the field name is empty. If I fill them all up, and I submit, I should get my name, and then the space, and then the value of the second field, and then a space, and the value of the third field. Okay, and that's being generated by this line in the script here, which is saying each time take the existing string that we already have, the existing string of text, add a space, and add to that the value of the new field, and then set all of that back to the value of the string. So next time this will contain the previous field in it, and so on each time, and it adds to the end of the string. So hopefully that explains that exercise a little bit.